Oh, what do we got coming here? I have a good friend of mine and customer named Steel Genwright. Just brought this truck all the way from California to have us work on it. He's been on the road for the last few days getting this truck here. So one of the first things we're going to notice here is when we start this truck, it idles extremely high. And there's no codes in the engine control module, but if we come over here and look at the coolant temperature, it's at negative 47. So this is a high idle due to it thinking it's extremely cold outside. Get a load of this. This truck has the touchiest throttle I've ever felt. Here we're going to just try and accelerate normally. This is like very steady on the throttle. What in the world is going on with this thing? I have a jumper lead connecting these two pins together, and so we should be seeing 5 volts on our coolant temperature circuit, and we have 0. Here we're going to load test the signal return on the engine coolant temperature sensor, and it is carrying a load just fine, so that confirms that our continuity is good from the computer all the way back to the sensor, and we confirmed our 5 volts is good at the sensor, so this confirms the ECU is the problem. So I need my lovely assistant Doug to record for me since Michael's busy fixing the fan. Hi, Michael. This computer only has 2 powers and 1 ground. You just want to confirm all these are good before you condemn a computer failure. Both our power circuits are carrying a load just fine. We're going to go ahead and test our ground circuit. And we are good. So computer is no bueno. I would like to start this out by saying I'm not sponsored by Thurin, Synergy, or Apex at all. I am, however, motivated by having a happy customer, a product that lasts a very long time, and not having comebacks from failed components. So the kit that I found that works the absolute best on a second gen is the Synergy steering kit. This is a kit that will outlast the truck damn near, and if you ever have a joint failure, they sell replacement joints. If you put a Mopar steering kit on this thing and you've got a joint failure, you got to buy a whole new Mopar steering kit. This is a Thurin track bar kit. I will say it's not my first go-to because it does still utilize a Heim joint, but since they already drilled out the frame for a 3/4 inch bolt, the Thurin is the only kit that I would recommend that still will work. Typically I would use a Synergy kit, but theirs does not have you drill out the chassis. So that's why we're using the Thurin kit here. It's still a really nice piece. It's got a super beefy bracket that bolts to the frame. I will say Thurin's 3rd gen conversion bracket is my favorite of all of them. It is the beefiest and it is the least likely to ever walk because of just how it's designed. You don't have to drill any holes in the frame. It is just a perfect piece. And then we've got Apex ball joints on this thing. These ball joints carry a lifetime warranty. They're a really nice piece. They're a budget-friendly ball joint. I don't see the point in doing a rebuildable ball joint or anything of that nature because rebuilding them takes the same amount of effort as a replacement. You still have to pull the axle shafts. You still have to pull the knuckles. It's all the same amount of work. The only thing you don't have to do is press the joint in and out of the housing, which who cares? It's not hard to do. This second gen came in with a far from stock steering and track bar kit. I'd like to show you why I do not believe this is the best kit on the market. It says right here in their instructions, they make the very best kit available for your second gen Dodge. If you're going to sell the very best kit on the market, you should probably make sure that it doesn't rub the sway bar link. I really despise Heim joint steering on a road-driven vehicle for a few reasons, but the main one being that the joint is an exposed style joint. There are some companies out there that sell some rubber boots to try and prevent road debris from getting in there, but salt, mud, water, dirt, all that stuff can get right down into the joint and cause it to seize over time or become loose. If you want to keep these joints alive, you got to spray them down with some lubricant all the time. And depending on what kind of lubricant you use, if it leaves a film like WD-40 would, then now you're just going to attract dirt to that film and then you're going to make it worse. If you buy one of these kits, you're pretty well stuck with it because once you drill out your knuckle for a 3/4 inch bolt, you're stuck using their kit. On this truck, since we're going to update it to a Synergy kit, we had to go pull some used knuckles off of one of my other spare axles. My biggest beef with a Heim joint steering or track bar kit is how you have to adjust it. If I did an alignment on this thing and I find out that the numbers are not correct, my toe is off or whatever, I got to take the wheel back off, take this bolt with the double nut assembly off, break this jam nut loose. And a Heim joint is not infinitely adjustable. You have to rotate it 180 degrees at a minimum for that bolt to line back up. So then you just hope that that's sufficient to get the toe right, and in most cases it is. Nearly every time you go to tighten one of these joints, it's a two-person job at a minimum, because you got to have one person holding the linkage here, you have another crescent wrench holding the nut here, and then a lot of times whenever you go to tighten this nut, the joint will rotate to its maximum position, and so you need somebody over here holding this joint from rotating as well. So every time you go to make a toe adjustment, you got to have two people. Now let's move on to the drag link, which is what connects the steering gearbox to this knuckle here. And that's what controls your center of the steering wheel. So if you're driving down the road and your steering wheel is like 5 degrees off one way or the other, you need to adjust this bar. Same routine. So you have to drive down the road. If your steering wheel is off just a little bit, you got to take this big ass bolt out, break that jam nut loose, rotate this 180 degrees at a minimum, lock it all back down with the same procedure I was telling you earlier, and then you got to go drive it again and hope that hope your steering is straight that time. And I can promise you that rotating that joint 180 degrees will not always get your steering wheel perfectly centered. There have been times where I have just adjusted a drag link like 10 degrees. So not 180 degrees, 10 degrees to get that steering wheel just perfectly straight. So if I were to do an alignment on this thing, there's no guarantee that steering wheel is going to be perfectly straight going down the road. If you check out the Synergy steering kit we have, this thing has an adjustable bushing here. So you loosen this pinch bolt like any normal tie rod kit, and you just adjust this nut here, and you have infinite adjustability. If I wanted to rotate the drag link adjustment that much, or even less, I can. And I just retighten that pinch bolt, and I go and drive the truck. Versus the kit that's on there, this is your adjustment or this is your adjustment. You don't get to go that much and stop. And I promise you, having this infinite adjustability is what gives us the perfect steering wheel alignment. Same thing goes for the tie rod. We do not have to take the tires off. We can do one alignment and be done with this truck. The Synergy kit uses a forged tie rod end that's a greasable assembly. I've got a customer with over 200,000 miles on 37-inch tires, and his is still as tight as it was from day one, and it's a sealed unit, so you don't have to worry about any debris getting inside there and destroying that joint. I measured the axle side-to-side measurement, and it is a total of 1/4 inch out of square. And so this track bar should be 1/4 inch further this way, which I doubt is enough to alleviate how it's crashing into the sway bar link itself and the coil bucket on the axle side. If you know anything about suspension geometry, if you were to like just jump this truck right and the entire truck comes down, since this bar is angled like this, as the truck comes down, the axle is going to move to the passenger side. So imagine this is another 1/4 inch further this way. That is not enough clearance. Whenever you come straight down, everything's going to crash into everything. One of the things I see a lot of companies do when they do these 3rd gen style conversion brackets is they make their brace for the bracket come off and go to this engine cross member here. And you can see what happens over time. That bolt loosens up because this is just a piece of square tubing. There's nothing to keep that square tubing from crushing unless you were to put a sleeve in there. So if you drilled that out big enough and you welded a sleeve in there, that would be good. BD has a kit where theirs has a sleeve to keep that from crushing. But this Far From Stock does not, and so no matter how tight you tighten that bolt, it will constantly want to come loose because there's nothing putting any pressure on the backside of that bolt. It's just trying to crush that tubing the entire time. And that bolt being tight is extremely important because that's what braces this entire thing. It's got, of course, this massive bolt right here, but this thing's only 1/4 inch thick, and so it flexes. And without this brace here and this brace here being tight, this bracket walks on the frame. Exhibit A, this is how this truck came in. This kit was not installed too long ago, and the bolts have already come loose due to the problems I spoke about earlier. This one is definitely on the ragged edge of having death wobble thanks to the track bar bracket being loose. No bueno. That's where Thurin comes in. They have the best bracket, in my opinion, on the market because it goes on both sides of that 1.5 inch thick bracket. It goes to the steering box mount on the frame, which has a anti-crushing tube inside of it, and then it goes to this one other mount, which they have a nut that drops down in the frame here. So literally, once you tighten this, you never have to worry about it. It will never come loose on you. Huge props to Thurin on that design there. I will say the only thing to watch out for on the Thurin track bar bracket is on some of these trucks, the sway bar is extremely close to the frame, and so you end up having to grind this, but it's a solid bar, so it doesn't hurt it at all. If you're concerned about it, you can always buy their sway bar kit, which is top of the line. So with all that said, this customer said, Brian, I don't want to spend twice, which he already unfortunately is on the Far From Stock kit. He just installed this kit, and I was like, man, I can do an alignment on this thing. It's going to cost X amount of dollars. I'm concerned about the joints lasting. And I gave him the option. I said, look, this is what I recommend if you want a steering kit that's pretty much going to outlast the truck. And he decided to pull the trigger on it. So we've got the steering kit out of the truck, and this is something I didn't notice when it was in the vehicle, but the tie rod is touching the steering stabilizer mount bolts, and there's not really going to be a good way to prevent that from happening because it's a Heim joint system. You would have to index this rod end one way, and then you'd have to index that one the opposite way to keep this tie rod from flopping up and down. And so this at some point is just resting on these. And the one last thing that I really don't like on this kit is how the steering stabilizers mount. So they've got this oblong hole here, and the steering stabilizer, if it doesn't mount on one end or the other, if it ends up in the middle, you've got an extremely narrow contact patch with this inner sleeve on this Fox steering stabilizer, so you're only really contacting on probably 30% of this overall diameter of the sleeve. And so what that'll do is that will allow that sleeve to dig into this mount bracket, and then your hardware comes loose over time. And the way you would go about fixing that is putting a washer between the sleeve and this mounting bracket over here, but then now you're going to elevate this bolt height even further and cause this problem to be even worse. Anybody want to take a bet as to if this Pitman arm nut is tight? I've got my tiny crescent wrench here, and just one-handed, not very tight, which is not good. So this truck has a aftermarket steering box brace kit. It uses this specialized Pitman arm retention nut and washer. The washer's not special, it's just the nut. This is your factory nut here. And a problem I see oftentimes is this surface here where the nut pushes up against the washer here is super narrow, and this is no different. This is a stock Pitman arm nut. The flat part of the nut that touches the lock washer, it's about 1.25 inches. This one, if we look at the shiny spot where that washer was hitting, look at how much narrower that patch is. That's not good. You can see on the washer that it is not engaging more than not even 50% of the washer. It's only engaging the first probably 35%. And since this Pitman arm brace has loads applied here and here, it tries to walk this nut back and forth. Well, it would be much better if this had 100% contact patch with this washer as opposed to 30%. So we're going to put this in the lathe and take this face down to where we get 100% engagement. Here we're just going to measure the depth of the threads that are in this nut to make sure we have enough to take off material from this nut. I know for a fact we do. We're going to compare that depth to the threaded portion of the Pitman arm. We have tons of room that we can cut out of here because it is bottom tapped inside of this nut. So the threads go all the way down to the bottom. And then we also have the thickness of this washer that goes on here as well. So we've got tons of room to play with here. Got her all chucked up in the diaper lathe. Now that is a much wider contact surface for our washer. So now we're going to have chingos engagement. Sheesh. But while we have access to the intermediate steering shaft, you can see that is loose. That's because this bolt got installed backwards. Thankfully there's a groove in the shaft that'll keep this shaft from sliding off the end of the gearbox. Otherwise that would be bad. Thankfully, since this redhead steering box is relatively new, this aluminum coupler here didn't get wore out from being loose. The splines still look really good in it. Little blue Loctite before she gets sent home. And now our steering shaft is not loose anymore. Got the sector shaft all cleaned off, nice and dry. Got some red Loctite on our threads there. So since this thing is so deep, we have no way to get a socket on there, therefore have no real way to get an accurate torque reading. So just gonna give the old tight AF routine. Beep. Now we get to deal with this problem. Far From Stock has you drill out the axle side bracket for 3/4 inch bolt, and the Thurin track bar has a factory size metric bolt. Well, here we've got the Thurin made in USA Heim joint, and here we have the probably made in China or India one from Far From Stock. These are what they call misalignment spacers, and the Far From Stock joint uses the 3/4 inch hole for the misalignment spacers. And the problem we have now is the joint that came with the track bar that we want to put on won't allow for this bolt to go through. So our plan is to use the good made in USA joint with the misalignment spacers from the cheap joint, and we're going to just cut the flange off where it goes inside of the existing joint, and so then we'll have misalignment spacers that fit the bolt and a Heim joint that fits the bolt. Now for our next surprise is our bolt. Thankfully is really tight in here, but extremely loose every direction here. I bet that drill bit was just walking like that when it was drilling, so we're gonna have to repair that while we're here, because that's gonna cause some heartache down the road. Well, the diaper lathe got us these bushings cut down, and now we will have one, then the joint, and then the other one. So now we have the made in USA joint with 3/4 inch spacers, if you want to call them. How we're gonna fix this bolt hole is we're gonna drill it out, and we're gonna put this weld washer in there from Rough Stuff. It has a little step so that it'll seat far enough into this metal bracket, and then it welds around on the outside, and this will take this to a perfect 3/4 inch inside diameter hole. We don't want to just go hog this hole out and make this bushing loose in here, because the backside of this bushing is not very thick. That means that it wouldn't have a ton of engagement. Look at how little engagement that would have with that misalignment spacer. If you recall, this misalignment spacer is what the Heim joint uses on the inside of this bracket here. So we want as much engagement between this face and the back side of this plate here. So we're gonna very carefully make this to where it fits perfectly in that housing. The first thing that we're gonna have to do though is we need to trim down this step, because that step is wider than the bracket. Got the bushing chucked up in the diaper lathe and one thou run out. That's about as good as this thing's gonna get. That's just about perfect, son. This repair would be easier if you were just enlarging the existing hole, but since we have an egg-shaped hole, we have nothing to center up on to drill our new hole. So we're gonna have to hand file this or grind it out with a grinder. And the easiest way I found, at least my idea anyways, is I put this bolt in there and I just snugged it up by hand. The bolt is nice and square inside the hole, and then I'm gonna put a Sharpie mark all the way around the outside of this bushing so that I know what material to take off, and then that bushing should just snap into this plate here. Alright, it's been 2 whole minutes, I'm impatient. I apologize in advance for all the voiceover you're about to hear, but on a 6.5 hour video, I ended up having a bunch of missing audio for whatever reason. So here I was just reaming out that hole for the bushing and just test fitting it in preparation for welding. Here's what it looked like after I welded it. And over here on the back side, we're going to see that we have a nice flat surface for our bushing to sit up against. Oh, 301, that's going to be enough. Normally you'd have the steering installed at this point and Michael could just go turn the steering wheel and we could line this track bar up, but that'd be too easy. It's time to go ahead and grind this sway bar like we mentioned earlier to clear the track bar bracket. We just have to take off enough to give it some room for articulation. Now we got miles of room on our sway bar. So in an effort to not reproduce repetitive content, I'm not going to be going over the process of doing what we're about to do, but we did pull out the axle shaft, so we have to do inner axle seals. So we pulled the carrier out, we're going to brush the tubes, put new seals in, and reassemble all that. This truck does have a center axle disconnect, which is why you have that big square hole in the axle housing, and it has this vacuum actuator here that pulls on this coupler. This is the driver's side axle shaft, very standard. It's got the splines that go into the carrier and the U-joint at the hub. This is the passenger side shaft. It is a two-piece shaft that has this collar that rides in here. There's a bushing in the end of this shaft to support the inner shaft here. And then normally in two-wheel drive, these shafts are not coupled, so they're free to spin from each other. And then when you engage the four-wheel drive, this coupler comes over, lines these two shafts up. Now they're one. We got genuine Spicer axle shaft U-joints and seals for this thing, so you won't have a problem in the future with leaks. We got the new Spicer seals. They're the correct ones for this year model. I'd like to meet the engineer in a dark alley that designed this, where this seal is recessed into this tube by that little, I don't know, 1/8 inch there. You can see that ring at the tip of my finger there. That's so ridiculous, because you can't just use a flat puck and drive it up against here like you normally would. You have to have something that is just the perfect size. Got us a seal driver done up with the diaper lathe. I had to put it on this bolt so I could put it in the chuck, but tell you what, that son of a gun fits perfect. Hit. Harder. Stop. Hit. 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 Alright, we got that son of a gun driven down the proper depth. I put 620 Loctite on there because the outside of the seal didn't have anything other than bare metal, and two bare metal surfaces is not going to seal very good, so 620 will keep her dry. On the right hand side, on the front axle of this truck, there was this spacer, and it says right hand side, and it's 3.5 millimeters thick, and it's got a little part number there, and it was only on the front right wheel, and I'm like, what the hell is this about? Now granted, I'm only 32 years old, so I wasn't around when these trucks were at the dealers and having all the new truck problems, so I didn't know what this spacer was for. Thankfully, we have the internet, and on some old forum posts, I had some people asking the exact same questions, and we found out that there is a couple of TSBs that refer to installing this spacer, see, 3.5 millimeter shim, to the right-hand wheel to avoid a drift to the right-hand side when the truck is not being held on the road by the driver. So like if you let go of the steering wheel, the truck will drift one way or the other, and you move this shim around left to right, adjust the thickness to correct that. And for us, we have changed all kinds of stuff related to this front axle. That TSB is wanting you to check the rotational drag of the hub bearings, the brakes, they want you to do an alignment check, all these things. Well, we've got new ball joints. We've got new steering knuckles that were not off this axle. These hub assemblies are probably not the original ones this thing rolled off the showroom floor with when that wheel spacer was installed at the dealership. We've got brand new calipers and rotors going on this thing. We've got a completely brand new steering setup and track bar setup on this truck. So what I'm getting at is we're gonna take this thing off of this truck for now, test drive it after the alignment, make sure that it meets our specifications for a pull or a drift. And if it doesn't have either of those, then we're going to send it on down the road without that spacer. And the way this spacer works is it does move the wheel and tire out just a minuscule amount. You're talking 3.5 millimeters, and that does affect the scrub radius. It affects how the braking forces are applied to the axle, so that, you know, since this wheel is further out, it does things. I'm not the engineer that came up with it, but it's not just snake oil. It does do something, but since we have changed so much, there's no reason for us to put this back on there until we determine that we do or don't have a drift. Another thing that this truck didn't come with from the factory is these 1.5 inch wheel spacers. It also didn't come with these 18 inch 4th gen wheels. So it didn't come with these big 35-inch tires. So there is all kinds of things that have changed on this truck since that spacer was installed. We're gonna go ahead and run the alignment on this thing. I had Michael check the tire pressures, torque all the wheels down. We did the steering wheel turn procedure. Now let's see how close our alignment is. Daggum, that tape measure alignment, sheesh. So you can see the recommended toe in here is 5/100ths of a degree, and our overall toe is 5/100ths of a degree. So this tire, our total toe just needs to come in another 5/100ths of a degree. Our camber maximum spec is 3/10 of a degree positive, and that's what we have. This truck did not have any kind of funny tire wear when it came in, so we are not going to worry about changing out that bushing on the upper ball joint to correct that number there. My favorite thing about these Synergy kits is how easy it is to adjust the toe. So you just loosen this bolt here, and you put a wrench on this adjuster nut here, and you have infinite adjustability here. So I can stop at any point, right there, right there. So we are gonna stop right there and lock this steering down. Okay, I can't do that. I traded places with Gigantor. The truck's a little too tall for me. And 90 foot-pounds is honestly quite a bit for overhead torquing. Go, Michael, go. So now that we have the alignment done, we can go ahead and install our steering damper because the wheels are perfectly straight. So this Fox shock has 8.5 inches worth of travel. So we're gonna mark it at 4 1/4, and that'll be where we align it on the truck when the wheels are straight. That way you get an even amount of movement to the left as you do to the right. Now for probably my least favorite portion of this build, I get to do body work. We got to cut this piece of fender out here where this battery tray mounts. Obviously a battery here failed and the acid rotted through the fender. Picked us up a donor fender. It's got the studs in it. I probably could have just used a flat piece of steel, but I may end up cutting down into here. It just really depends on how crispy that other one is. So we're gonna get to cutting. We got our donor piece cut out, and I popped the spot welds on the backside out, so now I can lay this thing over top of where the old battery tray used to sit, trace it out and cut it out. There ain't no turning back now. Sheesh. I don't have the right tool for the job yet. This is the bottom side of the fender. I threw a few magnets in there to kind of act as a helping hand. We got our plate here. It fits pretty dang good. Got no big gaps around the edges or anything. And I took a piece of copper from that tube that I showed you earlier and flattened it out. And whenever it's time to weld this thing, because all this material is really thin, we'll put this on the back side and have somebody hold it so that whenever I weld, it doesn't try and drip through. I'm going to turn the welder down best I can, but if any of this material is even remotely thin, I don't want it creating a big hole. So we'll try this out. That's about as good as it's gonna get there. She's solid. Got the studs tack welded back in on the back side for the battery box. This side doesn't look as pretty, but it's got a fender liner that's gonna cover it, so I'm not worried about it. But the main concern is the battery will not fall through the fender anymore. So, yeehaw. Before we spray paint on this, we're gonna give this Evapor Rust a try. Gonna try and get that rust off all this area here. It says I put a thick coat on there. Happy little trees, Michael. Happy rusty dodges, Michael. That rust remover stuff did okay. Listen here, I ain't no car painter, but thankfully this will be out of sight. Well, that's as good as it's going to get from this repair shop. Thankfully, all this is underneath the fuse block and the battery tray, so you'll never see it. I really just did this for rust prevention. A pretty common cause of wiring problems on these Dodge pickups is this harness here. The wire loom deteriorates over time, and then it chafes against the side of the fender down here and cuts it. So we're going to reloom all this. We got the corrugated loom spliced in on this harness and the one that runs underneath the radiator. I realistically only think these harnesses deteriorate because of the battery acid, because it's only ever underneath the battery tray that I see these fail. On both of his old battery trays, the plastic broke out where this clip nut is inserted. Super common when these battery retention bolts get acid on them. They rust inside there and they get stuck, and then when you try and take them out, it breaks the plastic out. So Jose Rosales got us hooked up with two used ones. And then this is an Amazon battery tray mount kit. It's got stainless hardware, which doesn't corrode, but you need to make sure and put anti-seize. And everything lined up, got our harness reloomed and routed the way it's supposed to be. All the bolt holes lined up on the battery tray. Really happy with how that turned out. Buddy said, I want everything Banks Engineering sells. So he's got himself an exhaust kit with a polished muffler and a exhaust tip there. Their tuner for these trucks, which I've never done one of these. I'm interested to see how it works. Got a couple of gauges. The Monster Ram with the charged pipe, their air intake, which is a cold air intake, goes through the fender here. And then Banks sells this exhaust housing. And then here's the 4-inch exhaust pipe kit. All right, so we've already kind of started on this thing. It's all pretty run-of-the-mill stuff. Michael's working on getting this entire manifold and turbocharger off because one of the rear manifold bolts was missing, and it's got an exhaust gasket leak back there as a result. You can see some evidence of said exhaust leak over here. Pretty dirty. Michael got all this pulled off for me while I was working on something else. While we got the manifold off, we're going to plane it on the belt sander to make sure that it's nice and flat. There's no cracks in this manifold and there's no reason to upgrade it. And we have to drill for an EGT probe here. I made the mistake when I first got into Cummins stuff. I was like, oh, I'll just put it right in the center, and well, there's a divider plate here. It's only hitting here, barely here. Getting pretty good on this end. It's got a long way to go. Sheesh. That manifold's a little warm. Not too bad though. Whenever you're working on these older VP trucks, whenever you take the fuel injection lines off, you really need to take this opportunity to put some new O-rings on the connector feed tubes. The O-rings deteriorate and it will allow air to enter the fuel system when the engine's off, and then it'll leak fuel when the engine's running, and it can cause an array of problems, but usually a hard start condition where you have to crank the engine for 10 seconds or so before it'll start. This is what the feed tubes look like out of the cylinder head, and they each have an O-ring here that needs to be replaced. Got our new O-rings installed. Listen to the sound this makes when it goes in. Oh yeah. It's time to put on our Keating machine tappet cover because we don't like oil leaks. But there's a couple of tricks that we have learned. I like to use a little anaerobic sealer on this adapter plate here for the crankcase vent hose. I put PTFE on the Allen head bolts because they go into the crankcase area so oil can seep from those. Got some nice squeezage on that anaerobic sealer. I'm confident that that will not leak. Even if it didn't have the O-ring, that anaerobic would do the job because these are two perfectly machined surfaces and it's got a really wide band of sealing, so that will never leak. This is the back side of that tappet cover. You can see that it's baffled here, which helps keep oil from blowing out this large crankcase vent here. Got all the excess wiped off of there so it looks real pretty. Got them holes looking nice. Controversial procedure time. So we don't actually use the O-rings on these Keating covers that they come with because over time they flatten out and will seep oil. So we're installing it like a 7.3 oil pan or a Duramax valve cover, just with ultra gray Permatex. You got to really push it down to get in that void where they cut that O-ring groove, and then it is a pain in the ass to install it on the engine. But at the end of the day, I won't have to warranty it for leaking in the future. I had one of these trucks that we did a billet tappet cover come back after 7,000 miles because he cracked the block for another reason because he left water in it. And whenever we pulled the tappet cover, this thing was completely flat. And where they have you glue it together with super glue, it had pulled apart about 3/8 of an inch. So gases were just escaping out the top there. So definitely, I don't want to have to warranty stuff for fun. And this is still our favorite tappet cover conversion because you get an extra crankcase vent and you don't get that flimsy factory cover that tends to blow the gasket out on higher mileage trucks. Got her all tucked away in there. Got some nice squeezage on the silicone. It really helped that we put these little cut off M8 bolts in here as dowel pins. We put one in the front and one in the rear, and then I took out this stud for the injection pump here. Kind of went in pretty easy. This bracket is where the factory fuel pump would have mounted on this truck. This aluminum block is what takes place of the fuel pump when you do an in-tank conversion. We don't need all this hanging out down here because we're doing a Fass fuel system on this truck and a fuel filter delete on the factory fuel filter housing. So we're going to come in here and cut this bracket off to make room for like the crankcase vent hose. This bracket actually covers the factory mechanical fuel pump provision from like a 12 valve truck. So there's a hole in the block behind this plate here, but it's only on this side where these two bolts are. So somebody might come in here and just cut this off or put a fuel pump block off plate on here and think they're okay, but the problem is the wire harness mounts here and here, so we're just going to snip it off across the top and bolt this plate back on, just this lower half, so that we can retain those two mounts. Here's our modified bracket, ready to go back on the truck. So if you're looking at the engine block, the actual hole in the block is here, so the gasket that Cummins provides now only covers this one area here. The factory gasket went all the way over here, which there's nothing behind this. The whole reason they did that is so that this bracket, which supports the fuel pump, would be flat against the block because this doesn't have a step down portion here. So if you only had a gasket here and then you put two bolts in here and tighten it down, well, it's going to twist this bracket against the block and destroy the gasket. So when we go back together with this, we're only going to put the two bolts in here because our gasket only goes behind this plate on this side. We don't need this extra support here because we're not hanging a fuel pump off of here anymore. See? That's the replacement gasket, and it doesn't go over to these bolt holes here. There she is installed. Got our harness mounts there and there. Good to go. This is what we're using for crankcase vent hose. It's oil resistant, 3/4 inch inside diameter. It's really stout stuff. It helps a ton on these push lock fittings to put a little dielectric grease on the fitting and on the inside of the hose before you push them together so you're not fighting it. Don't that look nice? Before we go stabbing this VP44 back on, you need to come over here to the parts department and get us a new VP44 seal so that she don't leak. You got to be careful when buying these O-rings. A lot of companies list it's the right seal, but if you look at this seal, it's a D-shaped seal, so it's flat on the bottom and curved on the top. And a lot of companies just sell an O-ring for this, and that O-ring is not sufficient. So don't get got by the OEM stuff. Pulled the radiator out of the truck so we can wash off all this debris from the factory crankcase vent. The oils get vented on the front of the engine, and the fan picks them up and puts them in the radiator and causes airflow restrictions, which can cause elevated coolant temperatures and elevated AC head pressures, which will destroy this brand new system. This one's really not bad. This radiator must not be very old, but we're still going to clean it while we're here. That is much cleaner than it was before. This is the front side. There are no more obstructions. We got the ECM all mounted up, and it mounts to that billet cover. And since that billet cover is thicker, you don't want to put this lower bolt in here because you'll twist the ECM. You could put a washer behind it potentially, but just be careful with that. If you do not put something behind that mount, it will twist that computer. That's not good for it. This crankshaft does have a groove in it, so we cleaned it up in preparation for the repair sleeve. Got our 620 Loctite we're going to put on this thing. On this repair sleeve, it's got an edge that is more chamfered than the other side. This would be that edge. It's kind of hard to see on camera, but you see that edge there, about 1/8 of an inch of it's chamfered versus this other side's pretty well square cut. So that chamfered edge is going to be the portion you want going on the crankshaft first, because it'll be easier to put on there. And my new favorite way to install these is with this tool. It's an engine barring tool from somebody. I don't remember where I got it from. This works perfect unmodified on the 24 valves and 12 valves, but on the common rails, they have a locator dowel, and so you have to drill that hole out. But it works perfect on those now too, and it's just a little bit larger than the surface of that repair sleeve, so it pushes it on with the factory damper bolts really nicely, and it'll get it perfectly square when you suck that all the way up against the crankshaft. Beautiful. Michael got that gear housing looking nice. I like to start all the bolts before I start tightening any of them so that the silicone doesn't squish out the hole, and then the bolts got to push the silicone into the threads. Got to make sure you get this stud in the correct location for the harness, and then this one down here for the crankcase vent hose. Also, I leave this sleeve in here because the extra tension kind of centers up this crankshaft, because this cover's not doweled onto the gear housing, so you just relying on this seal to center up this cover. So with the extra tension, it kind of keeps it centered while you snug a couple of bolts on here. You versus the guy she tells you not to worry about. Sheesh. This guy opted to upgrade to the bulletproof diesel billet water pump. I've had nothing but terrible luck with any aftermarket water pump from O'Reilly's, AutoZone, Napa, you name it. They're all junk, and they're like $50 or cheaper most days. So the only option I found that works worth a damn is the factory Cummins water pump, which now they have a plastic impeller on all of those, and Cummins ships them with like one paper towel in the box, so half of them show up with the impellers either cracked or completely snapped off. And so after 3 of those showed up broken, we've only been installing these and had really good luck so far. Couldn't just install that thing with them dirty old bolts. We got some brand new ones in there. There's supposed to be a wire harness mount that holds this harness here so that the harness isn't tugging on the connector for this throttle position sensor. And now there is. These push pins work great for these throttle position sensor covers. There's one there, and now this thing will stay on there like it's supposed to. Now it's time to do the exhaust housing on this turbocharger. We've got a new setup here from Banks. This is their turbine housing and downpipe. The good thing for us is if any of these bolts fight us, we can just cut them right off, and it doesn't matter because we're not reusing any of this stuff. On a few of these exhaust housing bolts, you're able to get a closed end wrench on the fastener, but on this particular one here that's underneath this oil fitting, you can't. So you really need a good brand open end wrench. The Snap-on flank drive is the only wrench that I would ever put on this fastener. So we got our 13mm wrench. We got our cute little dainty extender bar here. We're gonna give her the beans. Something bound to go wrong here. This was too easy. Might have actually jinxed myself. Nope. She cummed off. Are you good? Yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We got the turbocharger mating surfaces all wire wheeled up and put some anti-seize on them so that whenever we put this thing in the housing, it is easily indexable. We got the universal cleaner here. Michael just have to clean it off the floor. Probably the only person on the planet wasting brake cleaning the fender of a customer's truck, but here we are. So, now I can put the air intake on. Then I got to worry about washing underneath that. The time has come for the exhaust stack to go. But whenever I'm jacking around with this exhaust pipe, I don't want that hitting the window, so we're gonna drape a welding shirt over it. Hillbilly exhaust is removed. You know what else in here? The factory exhaust hangers. They are nowhere in sight. That is not good. Well, we're back out here at the neighbor's house on this rainy Wednesday, and we got to gather us up some second-gen exhaust hangers since the truck in the shop didn't have any of them. We're missing the one on the side of the frame here, one by the shock, and one by the tailpipe. This is the haul we got from the neighbor's house. So this is the frontmost frame mount exhaust hanger. This is the one that goes on the shock absorber, and this is the one at the tailpipe. And then I grabbed me a shock absorber bolt because those are handy to have around. Well, she was bent in 3 spots, but not anymore. These are pretty cool little exhaust hanger removal tool. Much easier than pry bars and such. Now it's time to install this Banks 4-inch exhaust system. Since this truck had a stack in the bed, there were 0 rubber isolators on this system, so I sent Michael to the local salvage yard to pick up some factory ones. These things never wear out. Even with 500,000 miles on them, they still look brand new. So there's no reason to buy new ones. Even though they were available, they were like 2 weeks out from the dealer. We got the exhaust just kind of sitting in here, and as with most exhaust kits, it does need to be modified. This is the hanger that goes in front of the muffler, and you can see the exhaust pipe is not straight. It angles down, and then it kind of angles back up. I'm going to have Michael push it up to make the exhaust level here. That looks better, but now look at the gap we have between the exhaust pipe and that hanger. That's no good. The Banks instructions mention nothing about the direction of this muffler. I have made an educated guess and installed it this way to give us more clearance with that front exhaust hanger there. Here's the installation instructions that Banks supplies with the exhaust kit. It mentions nothing about the installation of the muffler as far as orientation. Got the exhaust kit all buttoned up, nice and level looking from the side. Got our exhaust tip protrusion looking mint. Every one of the joints has about 1.5 inch long weld on it to keep the exhaust from coming loose over time. All the clamps are nice and lined up. Everything's looking beautiful. About ready to put this fan shroud back in, but can't leave it looking like that. Got this beautiful Monster Ram intake on this thing. We can't just go reusing that dirty old Adele clamp. Don't that look nice? Oh yeah, we also had to line up all the lettering here and make sure they're facing upright so that it looks mint. Michael got our fan shroud squeaky clean. About ready to put this upper radiator hose back on, but this thing looks like it come off the ocean floor, so we're gonna fix that up with a little extra effort here. That's more better. Got the Banks air intake installed. Made sure to line the clamps up and put that nice logo on top for them. My initial impressions on this versus like an S&B air intake, I prefer the S&B because it's got a nice acrylic cover that you can see the filter on, so that you can kind of, if you drive in dirty environments, know how dirty your filter is, because speaking from personal experience, it doesn't take long for them to look really, really bad. And on this one, you're going to have to get out here and take these 3 bolts out and pop this cover off to ever inspect it. But Banks does know how to measure thread pitch, at least. They supplied the correct nuts for the fasteners on the fender so that you don't have to strip them out like S&B does. S&B gives you like SAE fasteners for metric studs. And so every time you try and put an S&B air intake on, you got to source new hardware. Otherwise, you're going to spin the little studs that are in the fender. So go Banks. This truck's getting a 100 gallon per hour Fass fuel system. Michael already dropped the tank out. We're going to get rid of this factory feed line. This truck will never need that again. So we got the fuel tank supported where both of the fuel tank straps would be, so that if there's any sag in the tank, it is there whenever we go to set our draw straw depth. So the easiest way I've found to get these fuel sending unit caps off is to take a chisel and a hammer and go ahead and throw that shit off the side. Get you the right tool for the job.
video off. I got a better tool than that.
Oh, get fucked. Paul doesn't like my tool. It's not as expensive as his. For the record, this works perfectly fine. Paul has this massive contraption here, you know, probably cost $50,000.
That wasn't even tight.
I probably gonna take it off my hand. That's funny. I feel like I'm on a dang TV show the way Michael got all this laid out all pretty. On the fuel sending unit, we've got to start by removing a bunch of the guts from this thing that we do not need. This thing has an in-tank fuel pump. We're going to be getting rid of that. All these hoses have to go. The wires are going with the exception of the fuel sending unit wires. And this black hose is going. And then we got to like mow all this down up here to make room for the bulkhead fittings. Now we're going to take that hot knife and get rid of this little reinforcement here because that's where the nut has to go. About as good as it needs to be. This is not where the seal rides. The seal rides on top here, so as long as this side is nice and flat, which it is, we're pretty good to go. I'm going to go ahead and test the resistance of this fuel level sensor. So we should see a nice smooth arc from one end of the spectrum to the other. So I don't have the float on here, but that's, yeah, see it's open there. So we're at 213 on one end. Slowly going down. And these, yeah. So this level sensor is in good shape. We don't have any opens in the sweep. I went off the end of the bar here because I don't have the float on there, but we're not going to put this thing in and then find out that his fuel gauge wasn't working because whenever this truck come in, I couldn't drive it because it was so messed up. Now we've got to do some math. And if you're bad at math, you should probably just look into buying Fass's sump kit. I prefer to use their draw straw kits as opposed to a sump. This way none of the hoses are exposed underneath the fuel tank because the majority of my customers use their vehicles for working and just low-hanging fuel lines that can get hit by branches or debris when driving through a pasture is not ideal for most people. If you just drive down the street all day, there's nothing wrong with a sump. We've got to measure from the bottom of the fuel tank to the top of the sending unit O-ring. We're right at 14 inches all the way around. You don't want to make sure there's any low or high spots in the tank. So what I'll have Michael do is push the fuel sending unit down until the bottom of this lip is at 14 inches. We're at 14 inches. He's going to hold it there, and I have to measure off the very bottom of this sending unit assembly, and we are at 12.5 inches. Fass wants this to be 1/8 of an inch off the bottom of the tank, so we're going to cut this at 12 3/8, and that'll give us an 1/8 inch gap with this sending unit compressed. So I have mine pushed all the way up here, just the way I like it, but this thing has plenty of shank to it, so if you messed it up and you cut it too short, you can always just slide it down a little bit. And now I'm going to compress this to 14 inches and make sure I have the proper gap at the bottom of the suction straw here. And I can see that I have an 1/8 inch underneath that. That is the finished product. Whenever it's fully compressed, we need to make sure that our fuel sending unit arm doesn't have any obstructions with the hoses. It's always close, but I've never had a problem with the arm touching anything that it shouldn't be. So we are ready to put this thing back in the truck.
It was awful.
I'm down with that.
Setting the standard so low.
Mm-hmm.
This one actually turns on.
Oh, I have to poo-poo your Matco thing, Paul.
What?
It won't clear my Fass fittings.
Oh, no.
Junk. So here we have the best fuel sending unit cap installer of all time. Clears the Fass fittings. If you're ever having a really difficult time installing one of these fuel sending unit retention rings, I'm really surprised this one went on as easy as it did. Most of them, you'll try and thread it, and you'll try and thread it, and it's just constantly cross-threading, and you'll never get it without, you take this and you hit the high side, and this is not a joke, you hit the high side, and it'll snap it down over that top thread, and then it'll go on. I would say the better part of 90% of the fuel retention rings that I do, I have to use the rubber hammer. That's why I had it here with me. Easiest way to install these fuel fittings is put a little bit of dielectric grease on the fitting itself and just a small amount inside the hose, just a thin coating, and then push them all the way on. Whenever we're tightening these fittings onto the ones that go into the fuel sending unit, we definitely need to use a backup wrench here to keep it from twisting and potentially cracking the fuel sending unit. And then on all of the hose, we blew it out, and then we keep red plugs in all of this because some of this fuel hose is going to end up post filtration. So if you drag this through the dirt here or wherever, putting it over the frame rail, and you get dirt in this hose, well, the Fass can't filter that out if it's already past the filters. So you don't want to be putting dirt into a fuel system because you were sloppy. Same thing goes for the sockets you use to tighten the fuel system. Just imagine this was some dirty, nasty old socket, and then I took that cap off and put this on there, and dirt fell into the fuel pump, and then I turned the pump on, and now all that dirt just goes right to the engine. No way, no. These rubber pads, they are great for the garbage can. I don't use them at all. Where these two metal brackets go together, you're supposed to put one of those pads in there, but what happens is over time that rubber deteriorates, and then the bolts that hold these two pieces together lose tension, and then the pump starts to sag, and I don't want any part of that. So I've been installing these for years without them, and they don't rattle, they don't make any more noise. The only thing that happens is your fuel pump doesn't fall off. This is the factory bolt, really sloppy and doesn't have a lot of overhang. This bolt, obviously same size, it's still going to be sloppy, but the washer gives a lot more contact area with the bracket, and it's a really thick washer, so it's not going to bend. We got the fuel pump mounted. Both the filters are nice and high. They're level with the bottom of the frame rail. I've got the fuel pump lifted as high as it can go without causing interference between the fuel lines and this sharp edge here. And I have this fuel pump scooted as far forward on the bracketry as possible so that it has the least amount of leverage on that mounting bolt there. See how this bracket's stuck way far forward here? If I push this thing all the way back here, well, now that pump's gonna have a lot of leverage over that bolt, and it can cause it to break off or whatever over time. I've never had one of these pumps come loose, with the exception of the one time the gasket that I talked about compressed over time, then the pump sagged down, which that took like 3 years to happen. I also mounted the pump on the inboard side of that L bracket. Once again, for leverage reasons, the further this pump is out, the more leverage it's got on that bolt. And I've got that L bracket slid all the way in to where it's touching that body mount. Look at what the dang mud daubers did. Done clogged up my holes. Got a little blue Loctite on in the girls. If you want to keep from stripping these bolts out, gotta use these spline drive sockets. Now we got the drive shaft put back in, but since it's a two-piece, we had to cut that factory stainless band off here, and we're just gonna put a zip tie on that. Make sure and cut off the end here. Did I get you? We don't do that shit around here. So now we're to the point of running the wiring for the Fass fuel pump. And before we do that, we are going to modify how Fass sends this system. So, from the factory, if you recall, this truck had an engine-mounted lift pump from the factory. At some point, somebody updated it to an in-tank lift pump so that you can protect your VP44. To make that modification, they added this relay, which I will add was mounted non-existently. It was just chucked down in the fender. Currently, the way that Fass has you wire this is to plug their harness in at the fuel tank, and then that harness runs back up here to a relay, and then that relay sends voltage to the fuel pump. There are a lot of moving parts in this system if you leave it that way, because currently the ECM sends voltage to turn on this relay. This relay then sends voltage back to the fuel pump wiring harness all the way back to the tank. Then Fass picks up that signal there, runs it all the way back up the frame to their relay, and then from there it goes all the way back to the fuel pump. I don't want to run it that way because these ECMs are known for having the fuel pump drivers burn out in them. So if that little driver burns out, then your fuel pump turns off, and if you're not paying attention, you burn up your VP44. So how this truck is currently set up, the ECM has to feed this relay, to feed that relay, to feed the Fass. The way we're going to set it up is the fuse block is going to feed the Fass relay and then to the Fass. So we're going to take out the possibility of this relay failing. We're going to take out the possibility of the ECM failing. We're going to take out the possibility of the fuse blowing coming from the battery to this relay. We're just going to simplify all this so that the customer has less chances of this Fass ever turning off. So this is our harness, and this is the lead that goes back to the fuel tank. This plugs in line with the fuel sending unit, and then this is what goes to the Fass. You can see the only thing they're picking up here is the one wire for the signal for the fuel pump. So we don't need any of this. Sometimes this wire pulls out pretty easy, other times it's wrapped around in the harness. Now we have a much more simplified harness. We're just going to send this into the interior of the truck to pick up keyed power. I can get this junk out of here, store it properly. We added a riv nut to the firewall to mount this relay so that we're not just using some cheap self-tapper to hold this in. Now it's important to follow the factory torque spec on this of 20 inch-pounds. We loomed our red wire coming off of the relay and pulled it in through the cab. This truck was an automatic truck, so there was a nice little rubber grommet where the clutch pedal rod would go. We're going to run a fuse tap to this wire off of fuse. One of these fuses in here. This is the gauge pillar we picked up for this thing from Glow Shift, actually. They're the only ones that sell a dual gauge pod with the factory speaker hole here, but it's black and our interior is not, and we don't want this to stick out like a sore thumb, so we're going to paint this. And the first part is we got to scuff it up with some 80 grit just so that the paint will adhere properly. Well, I got to hand it to them. The Strateman Automotive Paint Shop knocked it out of the park again on this pillar. So we're installing the Banks tuner on this truck, and it wants you to use these T-taps to tap into the wire. Not around here, partner. We're going to cut these wires and splice in a short piece of wire that will then connect to this connector here so that you can unplug it if you like in the future. And whenever I was opening this harness up, you can see this wire here is damaged. So I'm going to cut that apart and see if we need to cut some wire out or if we can just put a nice butt splice there or what. We got that long gray wire. It's supposed to be for the torque converter control, and it ain't got no wire loom on it. What the hell, Banks? Got a couple of glue heat shrink butt connectors on there. That'll last.
Butt connectors! You young punks are ruining this industry. Back in my day, we spent 4 hours soldering one wire.
So unfortunately, Banks doesn't sell any gauges for this truck other than the EGT and the boost gauge. And we really want to put some sort of fuel pressure monitoring on this truck, but we don't want a gauge that's going to stick out like a sore thumb. So we're going to put a dummy light in this truck so that if the fuel pressure drops below a certain PSI, it'll light up the light, and the customer will know he's got a problem. He'll know that either his Fass is turned off, the fuel filters are plugged up, he got water in the fuel, whatever. The reason you really want to monitor lift pump pressure on this thing is because this is a VP44 injection pump. If you do not have a certain amount of lift pump pressure, it will starve the injection pump for fuel. It'll burn it up, and then you're out a very expensive injection pump. So we got a couple of components to make this happen. We got a PS15 oil pressure switch from a GM pickup. This will close the contacts at 4 PSI, and that will ground this wire here, which will run that ground wire from here to one side of this LED light, and the other side will go to switched ignition. But this is only a single wire switch, so it has to be grounded where it threads in. So we had to buy this adapter to go in between the Fass lift pump hose and the injection pump, and this screws directly onto the injection pump so that you get ground from the injection pump through the fitting and into the switch here. This is actually an incandescent bulb, so polarity doesn't matter, unlike an LED. So either one of these wires can be hot or ground. This harness that Banks sends for these gauges has just exposed connectors here, even whenever you plug them all the way in, and those two can touch each other and cause some problems with the instrumentation, causing it to glitch or drop out or something. So we're going to delete all of those and put some heat shrink butt connectors in there. There's no reason to have a connection there other than, you know, they do this for ease of install for people that don't have a professional shop. But the gauge still unplugs here, and this harness should never have a problem where you would need to unplug that connector, because we're going to loom it from here all the way down to the control module there. It also unplugs down here. This is what we ended up with. This is the branch off harness that has to go to the fuse panel, so I'm not going to loom it yet. This is the main harness from the Banks display, and this is our fuel pressure warning light. And that's how it all turned out up here. It's all nice and secured. These wires will be nice and tucked down so they'll never ever short out against anything. Turned out real nice. Take a little extra time and make it look pretty. This little brass pin on this fuse is what Banks supplies to pick up the voltage for the lighting on the gauges. It just slides over one of the terminals on the fuse and you would think you're good to go. Problem is you got a 50-50 chance that you've done this correctly, and they don't mention anything in the instructions about this. Because think of the whole purpose of a fuse. The fuse is to protect the circuit in the event it shorts out or overloads. It'll blow and prevent the circuit from causing a fire. Well, only one side of this fuse is going to be fused, because when you put it into the fuse panel, one of the legs is going to be your constant voltage from the fuse panel, which is not fused. And so if you were to tie into this fuse tap on the wrong side, then now you have an unfused circuit feeding your gauges going up to here. That's a problem because there's lots of sharp edges in here, especially if you don't loom the harness, that could cause that wire to ground out, and then that wire becomes molten wire and you have a fire on your hands, all because you didn't flip this 180 degrees to where now you've got a fused circuit. So the way you would determine which side is your side that you want to be on is you take a test light and put it into each side of that fuse holder, and whichever one does not have power on it with the key on is the one you're going to want to put your little connector on here, because that's going to be the output side of the fuse. Here's a quick demonstration of what I'm talking about. So we have our input voltage, which is, pretend this is the fuse panel here. So you have your hot bus bar on the back side of this fuse that feeds the fuse. This is a completely unfused circuit going all the way back to the battery. Now you've put your little brass tang on this side of the fuse, which is proper. And we're going to simulate a short to ground, and it's going to pop the fuse. You saw the fuse pop. Our circuit's protected. There's no magic smoke, nothing like that. Now let's pretend that you just willy-nilly threw this thing in there and put it on this side of the fuse, which Banks mentions nothing about. A lot of people overlook this. So now we're on the wrong side of the fuse. Now we're on the side of the fuse that is unfused, because guess what? Our wire goes directly through the fuse to this unfused circuit going back to the battery. Now I don't really want to burn up my electrical lead kit here, so we're going to replace this with a piece of wire. So now we have a piece of wire going to the wrong side of the fuse, and guess what's going to happen? Whee! Oh man, I burned out my lead anyhow. You get the idea. All right, so we got a lot of fuse taps in this panel. This one here is the trigger for the Fass relay. This is the dimmer for the gauges up here, which are not hooked up currently. And then this one here is the Banks module. I went ahead and labeled the fuse taps and added these stickers here to help the customer in the future if he ever has a problem with any of it. Notice on this passenger side A-pillar, there's a gap all the way down this trim piece here, probably a 1/4 inch wide. That's to allow for the weather strip, this little ridge here, to push up in there. But on our aftermarket gauge pod here, we have no gap all the way down. I've run into this in the past, so we got to come through here and trim this out all along there. We're just using the hot knife to trim off a little piece here. That's the final product right there. This thing has to bend, you know, to go around that speaker, because they move the speaker closer to the trim to clear the gauge, but this looks pretty good. Man, I didn't know if I'd ever get done working on the interior of this thing. Got the Banks module mounted on the back side of the kick panel here. Got everything tied up. The wires are routed pretty. Got the floorboards vacuumed out so he can put his carpet or his floor mats back in. Got all the wires secured nicely so that it doesn't, like, you know, you ain't got no wires dangling down by your feet when you're pressing the brake pedal. And I left enough slack under the dash so that you can still remove this pillar and bring it down if you need to service and access the back side of the gauges, or if you ever need to remove the dash back out of this thing. I have Magic Mike try and get rid of that duct tape from that console. Michael got that center console looking nice. Here we're testing the low pressure warning light by disconnecting the Fass. Got the new AGM batteries in, and we put anti-seize on the fasteners because these are stainless and they go into, I don't know if it's just coated steel, probably is just steel down there, but anyhow, looking pretty nice. That ain't going nowhere. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty here in the engine bay. We're gonna get rid of these dirty old wore out battery terminals on this thing. That is the #1 cause of problems on 2nd gens and 3rd gens is terminals. Oh yeah, she's pretty. This truck's got factory cable ends on it still, so the cables have never been modified or shortened. So we're just gonna come through here and cut it off with a grinder right at the terminal here, and then we'll trim it back and put our new terminals on from there. Now we gotta come over here to the wall of battery terminals. Pretty sure it's 1/0 on both of them OFC. Got the copper all cleaned up. Now we can slide some heat shrink tubing on there and start crimping. Now you gotta bust out your Chinese hydraulic crimping tool. Voila, now I gotta do 3 more. This is what our battery terminals ended up looking like, all nice and pretty. They're an AGM battery in this truck, so we don't need any protectant on them. So live a long, happy life. Now it's time to reroute the factory crankcase vent hose. From the factory, these trucks just had a little canister that sat right here on the front of the motor, and over time you would have to drain it. The problem with that is that these trucks get a little bit of blow-by over time, and then it starts to, the fan grabs that engine oil out of that canister that's in a vapor form and just blows it all over the radiator. So we're going to route this hose out the back to prevent future problems. We're going to accomplish that with this nice radius 90 and a couple of Gates heat shrink hose clamps and some oil resistant 3/4 inch hose. The reason you really want to use a radius 90 like we have here is to avoid restricting the gases as they're leaving the engine. If you used a hard 90, it would cause elevated crankcase pressures. This is what our crankcase vent hose looks like now. It's got that 90-degree elbow. It runs down the side of the oil pan and then runs over to the frame. We got it zip tied, and we have one of the 2 hoses, a dowel clamp to the chassis with some riv nuts, and they're just dumped to atmosphere behind the transmission area here. We have attempted to put catch cans on these in the past, and it never ends up working out. Watch what happens when I try and close this door. You see how it picks up? Because the hinges have sagged over time, so the striker is having to raise the door up to get this thing to close. So what we're going to do is add a couple of shims in here behind this hinge to take care of that. We've got us a few custom shims. I slotted them so I don't have to take the bolt all the way out. You just loosen the bolt and then slide your shim in and tighten it back down. Now with our shims, the door lines up where it's supposed to. You can see the body lines line up here. And the reason the door isn't rising anymore is because before, this striker was hitting the door here on the metal and causing the door to have to rise to get that striker to hit the door latch. And now that striker does not do that. It rides right in the center, so the door closes nice and easy. We're about to do an entire HVAC system on this truck with an entire new upper dash structure and lower dash structure. I've already got a complete video on doing an entire HVAC assembly on this exact truck, so we're not going to go back over stuff I've already covered, because honestly these videos take hours to film. For every hour worth of footage that I take, it takes me about 6 or 8 hours to trim that down. So I'm not trying to have to do that over again. If you want to see that video, I'll link it here. It's a little bit of before action here. Check out how brittle this dash is. Do this with caution because it can cut you. And just like that, the HVAC housing is out. Nothing spectacular in here. Pretty clean truck. Not a bunch of bubble gum and stuff underneath the dash. Let's see how clean the HVAC inlet looks. Not too bad. We'll get that all cleaned out of there so that it doesn't clog up the new evaporator core though. This Milwaukee M18 vacuum is easily one of my more favorite investments. Now let's see what she looks like. I wouldn't eat off of that, but there's no more debris to get sucked in the evaporator. Now we gotta bust this thing open. This is by far my favorite tool for taking apart these HVAC housings because it's a really long DeWalt #2 driver. Check it out. He's got a really cool, expensive coolant stamp. It only does rectangles though. Check out all the stuff inside the blower motor. That'll restrict flow. That's more bueno. Okay, Wade couldn't leave me alone, said I had to pick him up, so I'm putting him to work. All right, Wade, pull the trigger. Okay, let go. Pull the trigger. There we go. We're gonna make a technician out of you in no time. It's about as nice as a second-gen HVAC housing can look. Everything's all routed properly. All the foam is applied for the dash sealing surface. Got foam on the heater core and the evap core so that air passes through them instead of around them. All our doors have been tested. The vacuum actuators all hold vacuum. Got the heat shrink hose clamps on the heater hoses. Got the neoprene insulation where it goes through the firewall. And the factory equipped duct tape, which is how it came from the dealer. This is what that air inlet looks like now. Dang, that looks nice. Well, here's what this specimen looks like before on the operating table. We're gonna have to use this, and the airbag. And this is what the top side looks like. Make sure to give him his napkins back. Here's our new components. We have the LMC brand new upper dash piece, the DRT parts lower dash structure, which is a must-have. And then we've got the LMC bezel. And then we have the used Jose Rosales glove box, because these glove boxes have problems with these tabs breaking off, and this customer actually didn't come in with a glove box. So thanks, Jose. Can we take a moment and appreciate just how well DRT matched the texture on these two pieces and the color? That's beautiful. This is an injection molded piece, so they had to CNC machine 2 billet pieces of steel so that they could make a mold out of it, and then they inject plastic into it, and it's a really flexible piece, and it looks beautiful. Yeah, how nice that is. Check out how nice it looks even on the back side. Every one of these places where a screw goes, they've got bracing on all these tabs. It's just a really, really nice piece. I'm excited to see how this holds up. Let's tear this thing down. Now we got to move on to the back side, start tearing out some of this duct work. It looks a little overwhelming back here, but 99% of the stuff you don't have to touch, because you only need to touch the wiring harness where it touches the plastic dash structure, and this duct work only attaches to a few places in the dash here. When you think you're done taking screws out, take some more out. Michael, yeah. I got a job for you.
I'll wait for that.
That wasn't as dramatic as I was hoping. We're gonna have Michael clean these up, get all these stains off of here, make them look a little better before they go in that new dash. We're gonna have Michael clean up this instrument cluster as well. There's a lot of dust on the back side of the clear piece there, and then there's a lot of stuff that gets down in here over the last 100 and something thousand miles, so get that looking right. They didn't forget anything on here. They got the factory wire clip holes. Michael got that son of a gun looking right. This piece, however, still got some imperfections on it, but it's as clean as it can possibly get, so definitely mo better. One of the things you're going to need out of your old dash is these 4 little nut clips that go inside there, so do not throw any of those away, because you will be in a world of hurt trying to find these. That is satisfying. I've seen some dumb stuff in my day, but this tops it. Dodge mounting the VIN number on the plastic dash that's a piece of shit. This truck's a 99, and I was certain that all these second gens had this VIN plate mounted to the actual metal portion of the cab. That way, if you swap the dash out of the truck, you're not changing the VINs, or you don't have to worry about this dumb stuff. Come out here to this 01, and you can see the metal VIN plate is tied into the metal cab structure. So when you take the dash out, you're not taking the VIN plate off. That is extremely ignorant that they did that. Thankfully, I saw this as I was throwing the dash away, because who the hell is looking for the VIN number on the plastic dash? Not me. So, yeah, that was a close call there. The only other one of these trucks I've ever done an actual dash replacement was on an 01, which had the VIN plate on the cab itself. So, yeah, if your dash falls apart, there goes your VIN. You can see they've got this little drop down section here for the VIN tag. So we're going to get this off, drill some holes, and put some pop rivets, I guess. I'm not actually going to pull these pop rivets until they snap. I'm just going to pull them until I see that ball just get to the plastic there, and I'm going to stop. Because what would likely happen if I kept pulling on this until it snapped, which is the way you're supposed to do it, it would probably just pull that rivet right through the back of that plastic. I'm just not comfortable doing that, so I pulled it to where it's nice and snug, and now we're just going to snip off the tops, and then we'll sand the rest of the rivet down to where it is nice and flush. Yes, sir, Mr. Officer. Those came factory. That's beautiful. And make sure you have the letters facing the windshield so that it's legible in the vehicle. This is as far as I want to assemble it before I put it back in the truck. If you look, this side of the dash is like bent in, and that's because the only metal structure between this side and the entire rest of the dash is this little bitty piece here, and so it really won't straighten itself back out until it's bolted back in the vehicle. So we're going to bolt it in there because this thing is kind of bowed like this right now, so if I try and snap this other piece on, it's just going to not be a good recipe for success.
Bombastic side eye.
Kind of roll that side up. Okay, all right, just kind of hold it there. Stop. Push towards me. Okay. Up. All right. Hold what you got. Hold what you got. Mm-hmm. Gotta roll it back.
Yep.
Just need to watch that rear view mirror. Watch it. Huh? Okay, you see that little bolt on the bottom that you gotta line up?
Yeah.
Hang on.
Almost there.
Almost there, like what? Okay, hold the dash. I gotta get a few bolts. Sheesh. I'm no interior detailer, so just me and my Armor All wipes against the world. Ugh. That thing looks nice. 38 degrees, daggum. Getting cold in here. Driving down the highway, the steering wheel is like this. Just like 5 degrees off of center line. That's why it's so important to have an infinitely adjustable drag link. This is how far I'm going to adjust our drag link. I'm going to retighten it and go drive it again. It'll be hard to see because the camera won't focus on the road and the steering wheel at the same time, but we're driving down a nice straight section of highway here. I'm going to let go of the wheel. And we're not in the ditch yet. This truck came in and it needed an engine control module. We sourced one from a company out of Houston called NPC. They carry a lifetime warranty on their computers. Got that son of a gun plugged in there. Don't worry about it not being mounted. These do not ground through the mounting hardware. Now what you're gonna fail to see is the wait to start light come on here on the instrument cluster. I'm gonna turn the key on and try and start the truck immediately. Nothing. So if we let the thing sit until the wait to start light comes on, wait for it. Boom, fires right up. Well, it's a good thing it's got a lifetime warranty because it lasted 0 seconds. Hand me the next NPC computer. Let's give this one a try. It's still warm from when we pulled it off. We got that bad boy down in there. See if she's any better. Clear prop. Oh, no wait to start light. Wait for it. Maybe it'll come on. Oh yeah. And here we have a grungy old stock 99 computer off of another customer's truck that's here. Let's see how the wait to start light functions on it and see if the truck actually starts or not. So I'm gonna hit this key just about as fast as I can here. Wait start, boom. Why can't I get that in a Reman computer, huh? That's all I'm asking. And just in case y'all think I'm an idiot, that's the NPC computer on my customer's 99. Let's see how it starts. Doesn't start at all. Wait for the wait to start light to come on. Oh, hush up now. Oh, come on. Yeah. So the moral of the story, if you're robbing a bank, I wouldn't choose an NPC computer. If you do, just leave it idling out front. And they want me to pay return shipping on both these computers. In what world do you get to send me 2 faulty components that didn't last not 1 mile, and then I have to pay the return shipping? And we're back. Third time's a charm, maybe? I heard good things about Go ECM, so let's see if they know how to test a computer. Once again, for the third time, let's see if this one's gonna be any good. Hot dog, we got wait start light. And it runs. Sheesh. Crazy. Don't worry about the ABS and brake light. It had a bunch of codes for the ABS motor and stuff the customer opted not to repair. See? She's got a few codes in the ABS module. See if you can't hear the noise it's making. This is just a slip fit inside the muffler down here, and so that fit is not tight enough and was causing the rattle. Fool me once, shame on you. Well, you fool me once, you can't fool me again. It would be stupid of us to go ahead and put this new muffler on, considering we found the problem was the exhaust pipe doesn't press hard enough into this tail cap on the muffler. So what I'm gonna do, since we have a flexible MIG gun, I'm gonna get down in here and tack weld that collar to the inside of this pipe here so that hopefully it doesn't happen again. Boy, check out the length of this thing. We're looking down the bore here. That's my beautiful weld. Once again, for the second time, got our Banks muffler installed, welded in, and we did invert the muffler because we had it installed backwards. Made a inlet, but the instructions didn't say anything about that, but I should have caught that. The muffler is not really directional. It does have a bit of a taper on that inner piece, but it's so minuscule it wouldn't matter, especially on this 250 horsepower application. But got the Banks logo facing outward now. And if you remember, I was concerned about the clearance between this hanger and the muffler. It's not really too close. And listen, no more rattling. So that should be mo better. Well, after 100 miles of driving, we got no important codes. It just has the transfer pump circuit out of range, which is normal. No check engine light. And most importantly, it starts like it's supposed to. This is what our crankcase vent hoses look like after several hundred miles. Not a drop of oil on the chassis, that's just dirt. Nothing inside of either of the tubes, so this will stay clean for a very long time. Fass install's looking pretty. Well, we have put a total of 600 miles on this truck just to make sure that everything is perfect before this guy heads back to California. We got no axle seal leaks. The alignment is perfect. Everything looks really nice. And with that, this old girl's ready to go home. Had Michael give her a bath before the owner gets here. She ain't no show truck, but she cleans up all right. Got the interior all vacuumed out. Shoo-wee! Good job, Michael. All right, boys. Chris got y'all something. What's in there?
Money.
Oh.
There's a lot of money. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of money. Wow, there's a lot of money. Wow.
Say thank you.
Thank you.
No, I got a bird. Ryan's Kids Piggy Bank Fund.